Hello and welcome to another episode of Guess That Record. I am your host, Jackson Reed. This is the show where we talk about music and try to figure out which album I pulled from my collection. Thanks as always for tuning in to another episode. Your support is appreciated. I'm super excited to be speaking with our guest today. He was a founding member of the Pogues, where he played banjo on all of their studio records. He helped write some of the band's biggest hits, including Misty Morning, Albert Bridge, The Sunny Side of the Street, and the all-time Christmas classic Fairytale of New York. Outside of the Pogues, he's been involved in various artistic projects in many different fields, most notably composing Long Player, a piece of music that lasts for 1,000 years. I'm honored to welcome Jem Finer to Guess That Record. How are you doing, Jem?
Not too bad, thank you.
Yeah, it's really cool to be speaking with you today because it's funny, I'm just getting into the Pogues right now, and I was thinking, what better way to learn more about the band than to have someone who was there on the podcast. So I'm
Oh,
excited to talk with you about that and to learn more about your career overall as well.
good stuff. Okay, well, ask away.
Yeah. And where are we talking to you from today?
I'm in London, in Kentish Town, where I
Hmm.
live.
Awesome. Now, how I usually start these interviews, I love to find out what was the first song or the first album that you remember hearing that made you take music seriously?
It was probably a very early Beatles single. Um, I can't remember what specifically, maybe Twist and Shout. I don't actually. I think it was before Twist and Shout because I remember getting that EP. Um, I think, yeah. I mean, I was like, I love the Beatles. Like, I was born in 1955, so um, you know, the Beatles, I guess, were the first band that sucked me in, and then I'd start watching. There was this great program called Ready Steady Go, which was a it was it wasn't like a top of the it wasn't like a chart rundown show. It was like, a variety of different bands and then sort of dance competitions and stuff. And so they'd always have there'd be like a real mixture. That you'd have sort of ballad singers like Engelbert Humperdinck and PJ Proby and stuff. You'd have Motown bands that had come over, Supremes and stuff, and then you'd have like English rock bands, the Kinks, the Stones, the Beatles. So very quickly, I really, I was the thing I was interested then most of all was I wasn't interested in the ballad singers, but I kind of I liked the Motown stuff and the soul stuff, but what I really liked was guitar bands. So the Kinks and the Stones and the Beatles, um, were the bands that I have first memories of.
Hmm. Well, that's it's always cool when I get to speak with musicians who were around back then because the Beatles are what got me into music as well, and it's cool that it's like so many years later they're still making an impact.
Well, yeah, I mean they're pretty impressive and timeless. That's for sure.
Hmm. Now, how did you get into playing music? Did obviously you had an interest from it or of it when you were younger, but when did you decide to pick up an instrument and start playing?
I tried when I was a kid to play guitar. Um, I had a sort of amazing Beatles guitar. It was like made of tin with nylon
Oh.
strings and pictures of the Beatles on it. I don't know if it's actually very playable, but I used to try and play that. And then, that was when I was about sort of 8 or 9. Um, and then I got a sort of normal kind of acoustic guitar, I guess. Um, but I wasn't very good, and there was this sort of cult of virtuosity, which I couldn't sort of compete with, and I wasn't encouraged to play music at all. I was kind of regarded as someone who had no musical talent and was tone deaf. I wasn't allowed piano. Well, I was refused piano lessons by the piano teacher who said I was tone deaf. Didn't really want piano lessons anyway, but in hindsight, they'd have been handy. Um, so basically, I grew up thinking, I'd love, the thing I probably would have loved to have done most was to be in a band and be a musician, but I grew up thinking I couldn't be. And it wasn't until I came to live in London in 1977, 1978, that it kind of occurred to me I could play music because, punk had exploded this whole myth of you had to be like really amazing, uh, virtuoso. Um, and, I was living in a street where there was a lot of, bands playing and stuff. And one day I was talking to one of my friends from that street and saying, "Oh God, yeah, I wish I'd learnt an instrument." And he just kind of laughed at me really and said, like, "Well, we can hardly play, it's like you don't need to be very good." And invited me to go and sort of play, just have a jam session. And so another friend wrote out some guitar chords, and I could vaguely remember the basics. And I'd spent a few days just sort of learning to play three chords, really sort of cliche of the time, but you know, a well-deserved cliche. And and yeah, and so I went and played with them a bit, and we just sort of played real simple tunes, songs like Louie Louie, and just three chord trick songs.
Hmm.
And so that sort of gave me the confidence, and I started, I just started to learn. I had some guitar lessons and started from there really. But
Right.
I was 22 at the time, so
It's
quite,
it's interesting how you bring up kind of the punk scene and how it was like, this kind of encouragement of playing, simple music. Like you didn't have to be good. Because I interviewed Andy Summers from the Police a couple months ago, and he said like that was one of the things he was kind of bummed about with the punk scene because he was, kind of a virtuoso guitarist and couldn't do solos anymore because
quite
of how punk was sort of. Um,
pretty
but
bad.
now, you in that time in the late '70s, that was when you got connected with Shane MacGowan and Spider Stacy and all the guys you would go on to form the Pogues with. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
How did you
Yeah.
first meet them?
In this street, Burton Street. I mean, Shane was actually the first person I ever met there when I went to when I was offered a room in a house. I went there to have a look, and Shane was the first person I met. Um, and like I got to know him quite well, and eventually he ended up living in the room next to mine. And it was a great community of artists and musicians. Well, not just artists and musicians. There's all sorts there: lawyers, journalists, writers, nurses. It was a place where people that didn't have the greatest sort of income could actually afford to live. It was an amazing time in that respect. So there was people would play. People had their own bands and stuff, but they'd play with each other and stuff. And Shane and I played a bit with various other people. Not that much, but we were good friends by that point and hung out a lot. Um, and then at some point, I went away somewhere for a few weeks on a kind of just traveling around for a bit. And in that period, this Shane and Spider and some other friends did a gig called they called themselves the New Republicans, and they played like Irish, some Irish traditional songs, but with a kind of not in a particularly accepted traditional manner, more treating them, themselves like a punk band playing these songs. Um, I mean, that had sort of been coming for a while, I think. I mean, I remember Shane, I mean, he'd play all sorts of music, but often like he'd come in and he'd put on Dubliners records and various old Irish records he had. And there was one song in particular, Poor Paddy Works on the Railway, and that it always struck me that it felt like there was something kind of almost rockabilly waiting to happen to it.
Hmm.
And I think that was the song he first thrashed out on a guitar. It feels like that was the kind of don't know what the word is, but it was like the seed in a way. Maybe I might be wrong, but that's what I thought. Anyway, um, when I came back from wherever I'd been, um, Shane said, asked me if I wanted to play guitar in this group, whatever it was going to be, and I said, yeah, I'd love to. Um, so gradually we would he'd start teaching me songs and stuff. But I mean, it's a long process because we'd arrange a time and a date to do something, and then um, often something would happen, to get in the way of it happening, like he wasn't in, or um, decided to go for a drink first and then never got around to it. But anyway, as time went by, we sort of learnt songs. And also at the same time, it seemed like all these other people from the New Republicans had disappeared, including Spider. I mean, I'd seen him a lot. I knew him quite well and had been around Burton Street and stuff a lot. But oh yeah, then we all moved. We moved slightly down the road. So so basically, there's just Shane and I at that point, and we decided instead of just sitting around practicing, we'd go busking because it was a good way to practice and earn a bit of money. So we did that for a while, and gradually found the other people for the band.
Hmm.
Process took about 2 years, so that's how it all started, really.
Yeah. And so obviously you're from England. So were you kind of familiar with this like Irish style music before starting this, or was it all kind of new to you?
No, no, I mean I was familiar with a lot of it. Um, bands like the Dubliners were very popular in the sort of folk scene. I'd always gone to folk clubs and stuff. Um, but I did, get to know a lot more about Irish folk music living in a room next to Shane, whether I wanted to or not.
Hmm.
Uh, but as it happened, I wanted to. I mean, I think the tunes and the Dubliners had an attitude that's kind of like comparable to our attitude. They did to traditional music in a way what we did, but in a different time. So they took it on, and a lot of people didn't like what they were doing, and a lot of people loved it and were influenced by it, like we were influenced by it. And then we took it on and did it our new way. And so we always had a great affinity with them. But yeah, I mean the Irish music always loved the tunes, and but lyrically, I think I found them. The tunes. There's a lot of great tunes in Scottish and English music and lyrics, but I think I always went for the Irish lyrics. That they had something for me.
Hmm.
Um, that appealed more. So yeah, I was drawn to it, and I loved this idea of taking something that was already very old, something that was timeless, and redefining it in some way, not trashing it, but sort of treating it with respect, but in a way that was felt relevant to the time I was in, and the people we were.
Hmm.
Um, that's something that's a kind of theme throughout a lot of what I've done, not just the Pogues. This thing of finding a way into a tradition and taking it on somehow.
Yeah. And had you ever played banjo before? Because of course you largely played banjo with the Pogues.
not. No way. I was trying to play guitar. I was trying to play the guitar like a banjo. Like when Shane and I were playing, he'd go, "All right, yeah, try and play it like the banjo on this record," sort of thing. And and I'd kind of try, but of course, it never sounded like a banjo. And then after a while, I thought, oh, maybe I'll just try and get a banjo. And I actually went to this banjo shop that was quite near to us. It mainly sold banjos and a few mandolins and things. And there was a 6-string banjo, so I thought, oh, that's a good idea, because then I don't have to learn anything. I can just play it like I've been playing the guitar, but because it's a banjo, it'll sound like a banjo. But actually, it still didn't really sound like a banjo, because um, the style of banjo I was very into country music, among other things, and like bluegrass. And like the thing about bluegrass banjo is it's like this weird instrument. It's like really crazy. You know, it has this short drone string, it has the
Hmm.
4 strings that you can fret, play chords and melodies on. And then it has this drone string. And you know, that's what gives it its characteristic sound. It's not enough having a body on a guitar that's like a banjo body. You have it's the way it's strung. So eventually, you know, I twigged that quite quick, and I took this guitar banjo back to the shop, and the guy was very friendly and relaxed. He just said, "Okay, like look, I'll just sort of swap it for you for this 5-string." They were these were like bottom of the range instruments I'm talking about. So I got a 5-string, and I got out of the library How to Teach Yourself Bluegrass Banjo, and just learnt the basic rolls, you know, the basic patterns of picking. And I learnt how to play She'll Be Coming Round the Mountain, because that that sort of taught me how you could sort of weave a melody into playing the chords. And that was about it. And then I just sort of made it up from that point.
Hmm.
And I didn't
Now,
develop very much further, actually. I just got faster and
right.
and more endurance. I mean, I'm a
Hmm.
very basic banjo player.
Now, this was something interesting I saw when been as I've been doing research for this interview.
Yeah,
Um, I saw a video where Joe Strummer of the
yeah,
Clash said
yeah.
that you were the Bill Wyman of the Pogues. What do you think he meant by that?
I think you meant that I just stood there playing my banjo with an air of apparent disinterest, maybe. He
Hmm.
didn't mean that I behaved like Bill Wyman did when he wasn't playing his bass. It was nothing. It wasn't a slur on my personality or my habits. It was just his joke, because, you know, while people were sort of busy leaping around all over the place, I just stood there playing my banjo. And there was a few reasons for that. One was because if I tried to sort of leap about, it was very hard to actually like do the finger picking. Um, so, you know, there was a necessity in a way to just, you know, stand there like not really doing very much except playing my banjo. But actually, if you looked at my fingers, they were doing a lot. They were going really fast.
Hmm.
And, you know, Joe was just having a laugh. He also called me the wild man of folk, which was, you know, an opposite thing.
Right.
To, Bill Wyman was not the wild man of rock, but,
Hmm.
um, you know, Joe you know, Joe knew me quite well, and he was someone who liked to tease people.
Right.
So, they were both sort of his idea of having a laugh. I mean, I called him a few things too, but,
This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Marvel Marketing. Marvel Marketing is an award winning digital marketing company headquartered in Calgary, Alberta, Canada. working with clients in different industries from all over North America, including Canada, the United States, and Mexico. Marvel Marketing Services include website design and development, website maintenance, search engine optimization, public relations services, and social media management, amongst others. To find out more, visit marvelmarketing.ca. This episode of Guess That Record is sponsored by Guitarworks. One of Canada's top independent music stores for over 30 years, Guitarworks carries a huge selection of musical instruments from the biggest brands in music, including Gibson, Fender, Martin, Yamaha, and Paul Reed Smith. Visit any of their 3 Calgary locations or shop online at guitarworks.ca and join the Guitar Perks program to earn money back with every purchase. Guitarworks, your total guitar store. This episode of Guess That Record is also sponsored by Recordland, home to the largest selection of music in Canada. Buy, sell, and trade tapes, CDs, and vinyl. Located in Calgary's Inglewood neighborhood on 9th Avenue Southeast, visit them in person or on Instagram at Recordland Calgary. Going into the songs, breaking down some of these songs, the first one I wanted to ask you about was probably my favorite Pogue song, which is Rainy Night in Soho. And the one thing I find interesting about it is the fact that there's quite a few different versions of the song. And is that like, it's sort of, from what I gather, it's because Shane had a disagreement with Elvis Costello, who was producing it. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure how many versions got released. When we first recorded it, Costello got someone to play an instrument called a cor anglais on it, it's a lovely instrument, but it wasn't what Shane had in mind. He wanted a trumpet on it. So I wouldn't say it was a huge disagreement. It was just Shane went back to the studio with a trumpet player and put a trumpet on it, and it was much better. I don't know if there's another version after that. I think that's the version on the EP called Poetry in Motion.
Now, you obviously can't talk about the Pogues without talking about Fairytale of New York. And the exciting thing, you helped co-write the song, which is pretty pretty interesting. So yeah, like what how did that song kind of come together? Because it sort of took a while for it to reach that final product.
It did, yeah. It took a long time. I mean, initially, Shane and I decided to write a Christmas song, a duet. It was suggested to us that maybe it would be a good idea if we covered a song by the band, the band who
Yeah.
played with Bob Dylan, who did some Christmas song, and we said no, if we're doing a Christmas song, we're going to write a Christmas song, and so we started writing a Christmas song because we that's what we'd do. We'd sort of write stuff and get together and see if what worked and so on. So we both started writing a Christmas duet. We decided it would be a duet. And I wrote a song with quite a good tune, but with pretty lousy lyrics. And I played it to Marcia, my wife, because I'd always play her stuff, see, hoping she'd go, oh, that's really amazing. Anyway, on this occasion, she said, that's really rubbish. The lyrics are really, really stupid, and they're not anything to do with the Pogues. She said, you should think, do you actually even know what the Pogues are? Because if you do, and you think about Christmas and you know what Christmas is, you would come up with something completely different. And I said, okay, well, you give me an example then. I was being a bit defensive, and so she sort of told a story about, said, okay, just look around, people we know, like take a couple, they've got no money, it's Christmas, there's all this pressure on them, the guys are asshole. He's always pissed. He takes the money. He goes gambling. He doesn't win. Maybe he does, but then he spends more on the booze, etc. And then they have a big fight. And everything gets even worse. And then maybe, just maybe, there's some redemption at the end, and um, something works out. Maybe he does win a bet, and he actually goes back to the woman, and he's got her a present, and everything's happy for Christmas. But in these circumstances, so that. So I wrote another song with that plot, if you want to call it that storyline. So so Shane liked that idea of a story, and also the tune from the first song, which is the kind of more Irish melody that's in the fast Irish melody in the song. And he rewrote, he sort of transposed the location of the story to New York, and wrote it in his inimitable style.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I never wanted to write lyrics for him to sing. If I wrote lyrics, they were just there as a goad, really, for him to make them better. I love his lyrics, and actually, in later times that went a bit wrong, because he started to actually really like my lyrics and want to sing them, and sometimes that really worked. Like, I think Misty Morning, Albert Bridge turned out amazingly, but I actually went back to purposely not writing so many lyrics when we got to make Hell's Ditch, because I thought that's the way to get him to write the lyrics. So, I'd just have a few I might have a bit of a chorus or something, or just a title, something. Anyway, going back to Fairytale. So yeah, he put it, he'd been writing something which was the slow piano intro piece, and that fitted in with the story and the fast piece I'd written. And but then the band wasn't really good enough to play it. We just had a lot of trouble really making it work and all fit together, all the bits of it. And it took a long time to get the lyrics to settle down. Shane worked very tirelessly editing in those days anyway. Maybe in later years he'd just write something and think it was fine, but in the first few years he was really kind of tireless editor and kind of perfectionist. And so that took time. And then when we had an arrangement and a version we were happy with, we'd try it with the band, and sometimes, and then we'd try and record it, and it just didn't sound right. So it just took a while, and eventually we found ourselves in the studio making the third album, which was about 2 years later, I think. And Steve Lillywhite had this brainwave, which I don't know why we hadn't thought of it before, of recording it in two parts. So the slow piano introduction, and then we did the rest of the song, and then he just cut them together, and finally it worked. And then the rest is history, as they say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And was it because it reached number 2 in the UK charts, so it was a very big success for the band. Was it surprising for you that it did that well?
It wasn't surprising, but the thing is, there's never any guarantee, however great a song is, there's never any guarantee it's going to actually even get heard.
Mm-hmm.
So, the world is full of amazing songs. No one's ever heard them. And the world's full of really rubbish songs, which are hugely popular and successful. And it's just having that little bit of luck that they get the right exposure at the right time. So, with Fairytale, it was fine margins because at the time there was in this country there was a top 40, and if you weren't in the top 40, you got very limited radio play. If you're in the top 40, you'd get probably played maybe 2 or 3 times a day. If you're in the top 10, you'd get played maybe 5, 10 times a day. So it's very important, like when a song comes out, that it gets into the top 40. And I think the first week it came out, it got to number 39. If it'd been 41, no one may have ever heard of it. So, you know, on the one hand, yeah, given the quality of the song, because we always felt it was something really special. I'm not surprised that it's had this life and it's got this timeless quality like most of the Pogues music. So it's not surprising it endures. Um, but the deciding fact, it could have gone either way, like I say. So
Mm-hmm.
fortune favored us.
For sure.
And and it got to number 2, that's fine. I mean, number 1, it means nothing.
Yeah.
I really don't. At the time, it was a bit disappointing, I suppose, because people were saying, "Yeah, it's going to be number 1," and it's like, "Wow, we're going to be," and like, but yeah, that it is what it is.
Yeah. It's the one thing I do like about it is the fact that despite being I think like it's a song you can listen to no matter what time of the year it is. Like it's still a Pogue song
Yeah.
first, and then it just happens to be set during Christmas, I find, which is
Okay.
why it's
Yeah.
a great song to listen to. Now,
Yeah.
just earlier there, you were mentioning Misty Morning Albert Bridge, which it was another song I wanted to ask you about. And that was kind of interesting to hear because, of course, you were the sole songwriter on it. So
Yeah.
was one where Shane liked the lyrics enough to just leave
Yeah.
it as is?
Yeah. I mean, I just wrote it again as a kind of guide, but he really liked it. He says, "No, I'm not going to change it. I just want to sing it like this," which was, it's lovely for me. But and I think it works. But like I was saying, I think there's other things that didn't work so well. It would have been better if you'd maybe um, added something. But I can see how it. I think I'd probably, in hindsight, it would have been, if I wanted him to write lyrics, the way to do it was to give him less. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
At that point, because I'd had got better at writing. Um, but yeah, there was a few. There's a song called "Curse of Love" that I wrote that was meant to be on Hell's Ditch, but there was some crazy politics about that, which I think I really loved that, and he really loved it. Um, that I have no qualms about. But there was a few other songs. There's some songs I wrote I just think were not so good now. What it needed was him to sing them or him to rewrite them a bit. So,
Hmm.
like I said, so like "Sunny Side of the Street," for example, um, I'd written most of the music for it, but the only words that I gave him was "Sunny Side of the Street," and so that gave room for his imagination to interpret what he meant by "Sunny Side of the Street," which was not what I meant by "Sunny Side of the Street."
Right.
But it's much better that way because when he was really singing what he wants to sing, his words, it's going to be better.
Hmm.
So that always it always worked out better like that.
Right. And then I wanted to ask you about a song on this record here, Copperhead Road by
Oh yeah,
Steve Earle,
yeah,
because
that's
you guys played on the song Johnny Come Lately with
we did.
Steve.
Yeah,
And I've
yeah,
always thought that was interesting because of course Steve Earle, legendary country singer, and the Pogues. It's kind of I'm not sure there are many country artists that could have pulled off a song with you guys. So how did that collaboration come together?
he just he got in touch with us because he was like a fan. And I mean, we'd met him a few times. And he said, okay, I'm coming to London and I've written this song and I'd like you guys to be the band on it. And so we said, yeah, fine. That's great, Steve. Let's do it. And we just went into a studio and recorded it in a few hours. We'd practiced it. He'd sent a cassette with it on. And yeah, that was great. It was really good fun. I like that
Hmm.
song. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, it's uh the other interesting thing, if anyone's listening, the recording session was actually filmed. I found it on
Oh,
YouTube
yeah?
that you
Really?
can, yeah, the session was filmed, so you can see, what it was like in the studio, and you guys were all kind of set up in like different rooms and played it live at the same time that way, which was it was interesting to watch that.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Now, I would love to, like with the Pogues, kind of looking at them as a whole. Obviously, Shane and Philip and a few of the other guys have passed on, so the band's, definitely inactive these days. But what's your kind of take on the legacy of the band now that you can sort of look back on it all?
Well, I think, it's an amazing legacy. And interestingly enough, this year is the 40th anniversary of Red Roses for Me being released, the first album. And Spider was asked to do a kind of celebration concert um, in a small, really small club that was having a kind of weekend, sort of long weekend kind of festival of Irish music. Um, and I got involved in that, and James Fernley too. And it proved to be incredibly popular. So they said, okay, well, they're going to put in a matinee, and then it was still just not going to work in this place. So they got a big, beautiful theatre across the road, Hackney Empire. Um, so we played this concert there. Yeah, I mean, yeah, Spider did. He really did a great job of curating it. Finding get great musicians and singers, and it was great. It was really enjoyable thing to do. It was a fantastic concert. Um, but what really struck me was that a lot of the musicians we were playing with hadn't been born when that album came out. And a lot of them were young Irish musicians. There was a guy called Tom, who I can't remember his surname, but he's the drummer in Fontaines DC, who pretty big band now. Um, there's some other guys, Jordan playing tenor banjo, Fiat Crew played the pipes, and like so. The thing about them was like they're all like late 20s, and they'd grown up listening to the Pogues. So in a sense, and as they were fans of the Pogues, and so in a way, it was for them it was for them it was like when we played with the Dubliners. You know, it was a real great affirmation for us to play with the Dubliners and for them to want to play with us. And to make a record with them and have a sort of hit record actually. Um, and so it was amazing these guys that the same thing was happening again, but a generation on, and that felt really special to me. It felt like this thing I told you about in the beginning about being interested, about being part of a tradition and taking it on, was happening with the next generation. So we'd taken something from the past with people that are now pretty much dead, had inspired us and we'd played with, and we're giving it, this younger generation's taking it on their way and they're changing it again. And there's a whole load of people, in Ireland, especially that are so influenced by the band and doing that. So the legacy feels very much alive, and it feels very much like we've done our thing, which is to become that kind of catalyst to move the tradition on and keep it going in some way. So that to me is really, you know, very exciting
Yeah, for
and
sure.
moving thing.
And I think like the other thing with the Pogues that's interesting is just how many big time artists are fans of the band, right? Like Bruce Springsteen, and I've seen like Paul Simon is a fan, and like all these really well known artists who have spoken so highly of you guys. So,
Yeah,
it's
they seem to be. But I mean, um, it's good music, isn't it? I mean, I'm a big fan of them, and so. But yeah, no, it's gratifying that they should be fans for sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I would love to talk a bit about your career sort of outside of the Pogues. And the one thing I thought was really interesting is that you've created a piece of music that lasts for 1,000 years called Long Player. Uh, what's the story behind that?
Well, it's a bit like this thing of tradition, you know. I mean, it's for that time has always been a major preoccupation for me since I was a kid. I got very frightened by time as a child. I'd have kind of nightmares about it because I didn't really understand it. I couldn't tell the time according to the clock. I was quite old before I could read the clock. I was actually quite old before I could read and anything. And that I had various experiences, that frightened me. For example, um, my mother would often ask me to, I'd go and ask her for something, and she'd say, "Just wait a minute, or I'll be with you in 5 minutes." I didn't have a clue what 5 minutes was. I couldn't look at a clock and tell, and it was, and it was I've had kids, and I do the same trick. Say I'll be with you in a minute or 5 minutes, and half an hour later maybe turn up. So, I'd often be in this dark corner outside the kitchen waiting for my mother, disappearing into the shadows, and the sort of vertiginous nature of time, and get kind of terrified. And the next thing was I'd sort of have some nightmare, and it would be all to do with this bottomless time thing. And so I was always obsessed kind of by time and trying to understand it, trying to understand how we experience time, how it's so kind of pliable, how it can go so fast or so slow, or both speeds at the same time, and how it can sort of go forwards, but it can actually also go backwards, and how, time works differently in one's relationship with different people and things and places. So anyway, um, I started to become interested, when I was a teenager, and experimenting with various things, in sort of seeing if I could make time in some way, make some thought experiment that would allow one to dream oneself into time as a long, kind of, you know, ebbing and flowing thing over generations, over thousands of millions of years, whatever. Um, And so, to cut a very long story short, when the sort of millennium was coming along in the middle of the 1990s, the only sense I could make of 1,000 years, which seemed to me to be a very arbitrary number, and there seemed to be no great agreement among different cultures as to whether it was 1,000 years since, or 2000, if in a calendar, different calendars have very different years. Um, and actually the calendar's a big fudge as well. It's not, you keep adding little bits here and there, like a leap year, isn't it doesn't even sort of keep it in sync with the planets and stuff.
Mhm.
So I thought, okay, to make sense of this for myself, I have to I'm gonna make something that I'm gonna make 1,000 years. And then I thought about that for quite a while, how I might do it. And one day I was messing around with a sort of technique of um, using minimal musical material to make far greater amounts, which was basically if you take loops of different lengths that don't equally divide in length into each other. So, simple example, if you take something 5 seconds long and something 7 seconds long, you start them at the same point, looping. One loops every 5, one every 7. It's not until 35 seconds that they come back into where they started. 7 times 5 equals 35. So just from taking these two simple bits, 12 seconds in total, you've got 35 seconds of music. And I thought, hang on, I could just keep doing that until I've made 1,000 years of music, where it doesn't repeat until exactly 1,000 years goes past. And then, you know, you're back where you started, a sort of millennial loop. So yeah, that's what I did. I mean, it wasn't so simple. It took 2-3 years to figure out the way to do it. And then actually, I was still messing around with it. Um, 2 years later, the week before it was due to start, I was still messing around with it, um, and made a major kind of change to it. Because at that point it was still quite linear, and I thought, hang on, it has to somehow get back. I'm wasting a lot of material. There's things in it that people won't hear for hundreds of years, and I figured out a way that you know that all the material that's in it could get used in a way that it would be sort of heard, but in different combinations. Um, well, no, I'm confusing the issue here. Um, the whole piece, the combinations won't all be heard within a lifetime, but the separate the separate constituent parts will be. So it was just a way of making more variety out of what I had, and also making a sort of circularity out of it, so you could visualize it as circles, basically. Um, so yeah, it's 1,000 years long, but actually theoretically it's eternal because it repeats, and it's like the composition is like based really in a sense on how, if you look at the solar system, the way planets go around the sun, and they sometimes are in conjunction and sometimes they're not, and every now and again they're all in a line. So yeah, and so that's been playing 25 years nearly, and very lucky to have a lot of people that help and give very generously their time and expertise to help it keep going and to raise money to keep it going. You can hear it on the internet. You can listen to it in various places. So in London, it's been playing since it started in a lighthouse on the River Thames, which is quite amazing space. And occasionally we do live performances because, most of the time it's performed by a computer, um, or on an iPhone app, because that's cheap and practical. But if it is realistically going to survive, you can't rely on that technology. You can't rely on any technology. So it was important to find a way of playing it, just people, the acoustic instruments, these singing bowls, these bells that make sound, um, reading a graphic score. So no mechanics, nothing, just graphic score, um, people, musicians. They don't even have to be musicians. It's very easy to learn to play them, and the instruments. So, but it's actually quite a major thing to set up one of these concerts. But with the next one, we've done two, 2009 and 2010, and the next one's next year in April the 5th in the Roundhouse in London.
Nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's an interesting concept because it's like I've often thought about that. Like, yeah, what if a song just kept going forever? And it's
Mhm.
kind of cool that you actually sort of figured out a way to do that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it makes, to me, it makes kind of sense, with, it makes sense with, what I was talking about the legacy of, the Pogues music.
Mm-hmm.
That these things, there's a connection between them, and the conceptual thing of passing things on through time and starting with something that's already old, so it doesn't go out of date. That's a very clear link between the two to me. Now I've been around for quite a long time and done a lot of things. When I look back, there's this underlying. I can see how they all fit together. So, in a sense, for me, my approach to the Pogues was as a conceptual art piece. In a sense, I mean, it wasn't just that, but I can see how it was. That's what the idea that made me interested in the first place, where I wanted to be part of this thing with Shane when he asked me.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Absolutely. All right. Well, we're going to guess that record, as the name of the podcast suggests. So I'm just going to go over the rules for you and any new listeners we may have. In this bag here is a record from my collection. I am going to give you 3 clues about this album, and then you ask me 20 questions to try and figure out what it is. And if you get stuck along the way, I'll give you hints, so don't worry about that. And Jem Finer, are you ready to guess that record?
I am ready to guess that record.
Excellent. All right, here are your 3 clues. This album was released in the 1970s. It's a double album that weaves through various different genres and styles, and you've worked with someone that was involved with this record. Question 1.
It's made in the 70s. It's a double album. And is the person that I've worked with a producer?
He has done some producing, but he is a musician on this record. Question 2.
So he's a musician on this record?
Yes.
Have I worked with him as a musician?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Mm-hmm. Question 3.
Is it was it made after 1976?
Yes. Question 4.
Was it made in the United Kingdom?
It was. Question 5.
Is there singing on the album, or is it instrumental?
It has singing, yes.
It has singing.
Question 6.
Is it by The Clash?
It is.
Is it called London Calling?
It was London Calling.
Good.
Yeah. No, that's I was thinking it would be a great record to talk about because, of course, with your connection with Joe Strummer and the fact that, it was sort of, you were around to sort of see the rise of the Clash being, kind of in that London punk scene. So, yeah. And before we really start talking about the record, I'll just give a few facts for anyone who aren't familiar with it. London Calling is the 3rd studio album by The Clash, released on December 14th, 1979. The double album saw the band stretch out musically from their punk roots, incorporating genres such as reggae, pop, rockabilly, and jazz. The album has sold 5 million copies worldwide and has gone platinum in both the US and UK. So, what do you remember the first time you heard The Clash?
Yeah. I heard. I think I heard "White Man in the Hammersmith Palais" on the radio. I think that's what I first heard.
Mm-hmm. And they're such an interesting band because I think the first 2 records are very much punk, but I think London Calling just they just diversified so much and really grew into something much bigger. Um, do you remember, when that record came out, and if you had any thoughts on it?
What, London Calling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do. Yeah, I thought. I mean, London Calling. That track got played a lot on the radio and stuff. So I'd heard that, and I really liked it, and I bought the record. And yeah, I thought it was. I felt for. I liked it a lot. I liked all the kind of different styles and the songs. But I'm trying to remember what was on the second album.
Um, the Clash's second album.
Yeah,
I think wasn't I think
I can't remember.
Safe European Home or something, I think was the big hit from that
Right.
album, I believe. But yeah, it's London Calling. There's two things that I like to point out about this record. The first thing, I appreciate that on the album cover here, they
Leather.
copied the Elvis Presley album
Yeah,
with the
they did.
same font there. And
Yeah.
then the other cool thing is the fact that one of the more well-known tracks from this record, Train in Vain, was an extremely last minute addition, and it's not even listed on the record, which is kind of crazy because again it was a pretty big hit.
Yeah.
um and Yeah, and then the other thing that I would love to talk with you about, and we talked a bit about it already, but obviously you have a connection with Joe Strummer since he was quite involved with the Pogues and that sort of thing. Was I read that you guys opened for the Clash at a show?
Yeah, we did. Yeah.
Um, was that the first time you got to meet them?
Um. Yeah, I suppose so. Yeah.
Hmm.
Well, it's the first time I got to meet them. I think Shane knew Joe. I hadn't come across him before.
And then, yeah, how did he kind of get more interested in what you guys were doing?
Um. Well, when we played with them, we'd barely started. We hadn't made our first album. We just had this reputation from, playing round pubs and stuff and supporting various people in slightly bigger places. And but as time went by, our paths would sort of cross, and I, we were both sort of involved in a film soundtrack for a film called Sid and Nancy, and yeah, just sort of, just and then we were asked to have a special guest on a TV show in Dublin, I think, and we decided we'd ask Joe if he wanted to be a guest and do a couple of songs with us. And so we just sort of. But I mean, I actually. Oh yeah, and then there was this terrible film. No, that happened later. That first there was this film, a third Alex Cox film or fourth, which he decided to make. I'd written a song called "A Pistol for Paddy Garcia," and there was going to be a film called "A Pistol for Paddy Garcia." Like he wanted to get the Pogues and a load of other people over to Spain and make a spaghetti western, and he wanted Joe to be involved. So it's a terrible film, I think, but um, we we all went and did that, and so got to know Joe a lot better then. But I actually got to know Joe really not through the music or the film, but because Marcia, my wife, and Gabby's partner, became very good friends while we were off making the film. Um, and so back in London, we'd just start going around. It was more like sort of family friends rather than music friends. And we all got on very well and just spent a lot of time together, outside of music. Um, and then after that, that we decided to ask Joe when we needed a special guest for this show, a TV show in Dublin. We were okay. Well, let's ask Joe if he wants to do. So then we got sort of musically involved with him too. So that's how it all kind of all sort of happened.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah.
And he, of course, also produced the Hell's Ditch
Yeah.
record.
Yeah.
And
Well, that was yeah. He produced that, and then he also, he came and sang with us when Shane had left the band. He came and sang with us for a while.
yeah, it
Um,
um it is interesting. Like on a track like Sunny Side of the Street, I feel like I can really hear his influence on that track because I feel like the Clash probably could have done that song. Like it's got that sort of London calling energy to it, I
yeah,
find.
that's interesting. Yeah, I don't know, but
Hmm. Yeah.
maybe, yeah.
Perfect. All right. Well, Jem, we have reached the end of the interview. I want to thank you for taking the time to come on the podcast. It was really cool to talk with you about your career and hear all your stories.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Hmm.
Thank you thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And what projects do you have on the go right now that people can check out?
Um, there's a band I'm in, um, myself and Jimmy Corty. It's called the Standing Stones. We've got a single out with a great folk singer called Alistair Roberts, called Twa Brothers. You can find it on Bandcamp, and yeah, that's so the Standing Stones, or the Stones for short, if you like. But so there's that. Um, and then I play with yeah, I mean I do a lot of playing with different people, mainly playing the hurdy-gurdy these days, and a few kind of different non-musical things. But really what I'm most interested in at the minute is this band, the Standing Stones, because we also do stand stones. We're kind of like Neolithic land artists, and so we're just looking. We've got one standing in Sussex, which is encoded with the music of a previous record we made when we were called Local Psycho, the hurdy-gurdy song, and we're just making plans for its kind of companion stone. That one's called the Gurdy Stone. The next one is like another 3-ton, 12-foot hunk of slate, 40 million years old, which we're hoping to stand in Yorkshire on the moors
Nice.
in May. But yeah, listen to the song, the Standing Stones. It's a single, but it's really long. It's twice the length of Bohemian Rhapsody. Maybe not the best idea for getting radio play if such a thing exists, but I think it has to be, it has to be that length, because that's how long it took to get to the end of it,
Yeah.
basically.
Awesome. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Guess That Record. Make sure to leave a 5-star review wherever you listen and tell your friends to check us out. I want to shout out our radio partners currently airing Guess That Record as a syndicated show: CKMS in Kitchener Waterloo, Ontario, CKXU in Lethbridge, Alberta, KBFG in Seattle, Washington, and South Devon Sound in Kingsbridge, UK. If you're in those markets, be sure to check those stations out to hear the show. If you're with a radio station and you'd be interested in adding Guess That Record to your programming, send us an email to guessthatrecordpodcast@gmail.com. We'd also appreciate it if you follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our username on both platforms is at Guess That Record. And lastly, subscribe to our YouTube channel to see the video versions of these amazing interviews. Remember to keep rocking, and we'll see you on the next episode of Guess That Record.